Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Sebastian Harenberg. Sebastian, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan.
I am really looking forward to our conversation. We're going to be talking about positional competition in sport, in team sports, and it's a topic we haven't spoken about before. And I didn't know there was much research literature on this, or that it existed before. So I'm super excited to be having this conversation with you. But before we get cracking with that, Sebastian, I'd love to know about you and about your work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. So I am an associate professor in sports psychology in the Department of Human Kinetics here at San Francisco Xavier University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. Now, if you know where Antigonish is, you would impress me. It is in the northeastern part of Nova Scotia, which is very much in the east of Canada. And, we've been here for about 4.5 years. And as you can probably hear by my funny accent, there's a lot of things going on. So I am actually not Canadian, I'm German. And so I was, born and raised over in Germany. I grew up in a small town, played soccer, played a little bit of ice hockey, and sampled a bunch of different sports, rowing and others. And I did my undergraduate degree actually at the University of Göttingen. It was a combined bachelor's and master's in education. And so I was set to become a high school teacher and in English and physical education until I think it was the very latter stages of my master's where I took a motivation and a psychology of learning class where we learned a lot about self-determination theory and attribution theory and other theories that were so immediately applicable to my athlete brain. And then it happened, and my passion for sports psychology had developed. Now, I had no idea that sports psychology existed before that, really. So I decided to write my master's thesis on leadership. And due to some funny circumstances, got offered a PhD-ship in Saskatchewan, in Regina, Saskatchewan, in Canada. And decided to move to Canada and work with Dr. Harold Reamer on a leadership topic. Finished my PhD in 2014, so a while ago. Then worked for a couple of years in health, where I worked with a bunch of different physicians, surgeons, etc. I decided that I wanted to go back into academia and took an academic position in upstate New York at Ithaca College. And there I actually was a professor in research methods and statistics. So only taught the really interesting stuff.
Wow.
But still conducted research in sports psychology, and then was hired in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic here at San Francisco Xavier University in Canada. My wife's Canadian, so we wanted to come back to Canada. So we're very much in the East here now. And aside from my academic career, I've been a soccer athlete until I retired when I left Germany, and then I was a soccer coach for 11 years at the collegiate level. So I worked with the University of Regina Cougars women's soccer team. I worked with the Ithaca Bombers women's soccer team. And then when our first son was born, I realized that practice times coincide very much with bedtime. So I engaged a little bit more in my mental performance consulting work and obtained my certification as a certified mental performance consultant. And I'm now the mental performance lead here at San Francisco Xavier University. So we're providing applied services. My PhD student and I, are providing applied services for about 350 athletes here.
When you reflect back, fantastic biography, and thank you for letting us know about your experiences so far in life. Absolutely fascinating journey. And when you reflect back on your PhD in leadership, I'm guessing you were coaching at the same time or similar time. Did that PhD help your coaching, do you feel, when you reflect back?
I think so. I'd like to think so.
You just like seem so sure there.
I should say, I was, I started coaching, when I moved over to Canada. So, obviously I had lots to learn. But my PhD and my PhD research, which positional competition was part of that, really kind of like helped me opening my eyes towards some of the struggles that some of the athletes would go through. I think as an assistant coach, you a lot of times have like I don't want to call it a middleman role, but like a mediator role, maybe between the head coach and the athletes at times. And so sometimes you have to find common ground and, learn about the frustrations of some of the athletes and have, some conversations that can help the athlete and both sustain motivation, but then also help understand some of the decisions of the
Mm.
head coach. So yes, I would say the PhD journey certainly has kind of influenced me, and vice versa. I think my coaching experience has also influenced my PhD and how I conducted my research.
And when you reflect back, you mentioned there being an assistant coach and you were getting into the weeds. I think assistant coaches are in a wonderful position to deliver actually on mental skills. So, did your interest in mental skills and the psychological aspects of learning and performance actually flourish when you were in that role? Was that a real sort of catalyst for your interest in becoming a CMPC mental skills coach?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And I think I learned both the technical and tactical side about soccer. And I think I just generally gained a deeper understanding of the game. And through my education, I really learned that there are so many different skills that athletes need to be good at to be a well-rounded and good performer. And so I think both my interest in soccer and being a better coach really kind of like was ignited, like really that passion was ignited to be a better coach, but then also to consider the application of my research and to consider how can I actually use this knowledge that I'm producing for the athletes that I'm working with. And the athletes have taught me a lot about my PhD research. The athletes have taught me a lot about me as a person and me as a practitioner. And so, yeah, I think, it's been really this period that I was in Regina and doing my PhD has been really transformational in many ways.
So we're here to unpack a paper that you led on. You had some fantastic co-authors. Your former supervisor, Harold Riemer, Kim Dorsch, Erwin Karaman, and Carl Paradis. And collectively, you've written about positional competition in sport, the advancement of a conceptual framework for positional competition in sport, development and validation of the positional competition in team sports questionnaire. So, really interested in unpacking this. And obviously, when we first started talking, this idea of positional competition in sport, because I've worked so heavily at the coalface in a number of sports, but in your sport of soccer in particular, and being blessed to work at the very highest level, I know that positional competition is a big deal. It's a huge deal for coaches, for players themselves, for the relationship between coaches and players, arguably for the whole organisation, and for the management, the systemic management of players. So I know how impactful this can be, but you've mentioned that positional competition played a part in your PhD in leadership. I mean, is that where your interest started?
Yeah. So when we're talking about the origins of this paper, when we're thinking about how this journey started, I actually have to go back to the year of 2008. And I have to tell you a little bit of a story.
Please.
So in 2008, I was in the process of writing my dissertation. Oh, sorry, my master's thesis. At the University of Göttingen on leadership, and I was flipping through my literature review and through the articles that I've gathered, and there were two names that consistently kind of came up, and one with Pakianathan Cheladurai, who's the father of the multidimensional model, who's considered by many the father of leadership research in sport, starting in the late 70s and 80s. And the other name was Harold Riemer. And so, as coincidence would have it, I actually was planning a trip to visit some friends in Ohio. I was attending a wedding. And as I was flipping through the articles, I actually saw that Pakianathan Cheladurai, um, he actually worked at the Ohio State University at the time, which is 20 minutes from my friend's house. So I decided to send him an email, and we agreed on a time where we could meet. And in this conversation that we then had, which I still recorded on my old Nokia phone, so in this conversation, Number one, he actually referred me to Harold Riemer, who then was my future PhD supervisor, and by coincidence also speaks German, which is, how crazy can it get? How can the stars align more? So he could read my master's thesis. But another thing that we did, or that I asked Cella at the end, was what are some areas in leadership research that we haven't explored yet? And so one of the things that Cella said was that we as researchers in leadership need to better understand how coaches motivate not only the players that are in the spotlight and that are getting all the playing time, but especially the players that are sitting on the bench or sitting in the stands, that are also playing a very, very important role for the team. And so this question really resonated with me, still resonates with me, and really drove the line of research that this paper comes out of. Um, to me, like my mind, and this might be my bias, went immediately to competition within a team. I'm a fairly competitive person. I played as an athlete on a team that was competitive. We didn't play in very high levels in Germany. Like some people would maybe even consider us a beer league team, but we still had more players than available positions, and there was some competition going on, and that really, me as a player, really kept me fresh. It was one of the things that really motivated me to be ahead of other people, and I really enjoyed that part. Now, that being said, I also got most of the playing time during my playing days, right? So there might be a little bit of a biased perspective. But it's been one of those perspectives where I was like, yeah, competition, I think, is one of those things, as you just said, I think can really help motivate players if it is structured well. And yeah, that's where this whole journey started.
And so take us from there, and I suppose that offers a neat segue into this paper, or any papers that precede this paper but build on your PhD. Yeah, give us a bit of a historical background as to this paper that's in front of me here.
Yeah, 100%. So when I started this type of research, I was under the impression, okay, competition is such a prevalent phenomenon. And like you alluded to, I think if you're looking at team sports in particular, I don't think there's very many team sports in a performance domain that do not have positional competition. So when I started this line of research, I was fairly certain that there would be a lot of research out there that would actually explore this. And I was shocked by actually not finding a whole lot. And you know, I went about then to try to study this, and I had many conversations with my former supervisor about this, how to kind of approach this, because really positional competition is in kind of like a in between space, if you wish, between management and leadership. So management, I understand, is like managing the team, putting out the lineups, and so on and so on. Leadership in how I influence people towards a common goal. So it's really in kind of like a middle place in between. And so as we embarked on this journey, we first and foremost had to kind of define what positional competition actually is. Um, and so positional is fairly clear. Position refers to where you are on the field. Now, competition is not so clear. And we use competition for a variety of different purposes. We use it for a comparative process, right? We refer with the word competition to an event. We refer to it as a person. We refer to it as a playing level. And so just like many other terms that we have in sports psychology, like, talent, you can talk to Joe Baker about that, right? Or you did already, or leadership, resilience. And this term can mean a lot of different things to different people. Now, from a research perspective, that obviously doesn't necessarily do us a favor, because how can we, if we don't have a clear cut understanding of what competition is or what the thing is that we're trying to study, how can we study it, right? So we first had to kind of embark on a journey to define what competition actually is. And competition, you would hope that research has a more clear cut definition of what competition is, and that is unfortunately not the case. So I think during the first probably year and a half of my doctoral work, I went through the literature and read everything and every single definition under the sun around competition. May that be a zero-sum definition, may that be a goal interdependence definition, all different kinds of definitions were game essentially. And we, after a year and a half, we kind of got a little bit closer, but we still couldn't quite get to the ground of it. So at that point in time, we decided we might as well ask some people who know something about it, which is the athletes and coaches. So we embarked on 2 qualitative studies, which have been published in the International Sports Coaching Journal, and we just asked, tell us something about the competition that happens within your team. And one of the things that became fairly apparent is that there are at least 2 different types of competitions that are happening within teams. There's most likely more, but those 2 really were shining through. The first type we called situational competition. And those are the little situations, like the 2 versus 2s, 3 versus 3s, these little competitive situations that coaches plug into their practices to either simulate the pressures of the game or to enhance motivation of both, right? And those situational competitions are actually fairly easy to define because they have a start and an end point. They have a certain rule system. They have a certain outcome that is, counted. There is usually a winner and a loser. The rules are enforced by the coach or by a referee or by some other entity. And so, to me, these competitions are very neat. They're easily to define. They're, very visible. They remind me a lot of times of like, hey, if you engage in a board game, that, it's a competition. We can agree on that, right? So it's situational, it's time bound. And then we found this positional competition. And positional competition is something that is a little bit different from those situations. And just by the mere fact that, for example, the coaches said, well, we're not going to throw our athletes in a 1-against-1 situation. Whoever wins that particular situation, is going to play on the weekend. They would take each other's head off, essentially. Like they're not going to do that. And so they describe positional competition as something that is not situational bound. It is something that is actually going on over longer periods of time. And this really piqued our interest because the available definitions of competition really didn't fit with that. Most of the definitions of competition really had a situational kind of focus. It's one specific situation. This positional competition, we argue, is a team process. You engage in positional competition the moment you join a high performance team. Now, one of the caveats here is like, this happens on teams where there's more players than playing position, than available positions, and teams that are striving for excellence, right? When I'm thinking, for example, I'm a hockey coach now too. My 2 kids, they're 7 and 4. They're playing right now in recreational hockey, and that's ice hockey. Their playing time for my 7-year-old is regulated. After 1.5 minutes, there goes a buzzer, and everyone changes, and everyone gets the same amount of playing time. For a recreational developmental process, that makes perfect sense. We're talking here about university level, professional level, where, academy level, where really the playing time is dictated by performance comparison. So when we're thinking about the evaluation and when we're thinking about the latency of this particular process, literally every single thing that an athlete does, with the awareness of the coach, obviously, factors into the decision who's going to play on the weekend. Now, we can even from a complexity perspective take this up a notch. Some of the players that are competing against each other might not necessarily play for the same team. Let me give you an example. Kai Havertz is playing for Arsenal, and Dennis Undav is playing for Stuttgart. They're both, very good strikers for the German national team. They're both vying for the same starting spot on the national team, even though they're playing in different leagues, in different countries for different teams, right? And most of the times, they will not even directly compete against each other, other than obviously in the German national team practices and so on and so on. But, like the coaches are obviously visiting them and watching them, to kind of form an opinion about them. So this positional competition is really kind of like a different animal, what we've uncovered. And it is a different type of competition that, from our regular situational competitions that are happening in practice.
And it's Listening to everything that you've said, and it's so interesting. I would argue, as somebody who is blessed to get the opportunity to work with, I obviously work with a lot of teams and have over the years, and that's a certain dynamic as a sports psychologist when I try to help players and coaches navigate this challenge. So I'm going to start talking about the practical element at the coalface here, and we'll obviously come back to your research. But also working with individuals outside of their club. So I'm engaged by an individual player. And I know how stress inducing and anxiety inducing this competition is. In fact, it's almost my number one response when somebody says to me, and there's lots of responses to this question that is often posed. Well, Dan, you've been a pro golfer. We can see how golf is psychological, but how is a sport like soccer, football psychological? It's so quick and blah, blah, blah. And there's lots of answers one can give, but one of which is in team sports. As a golfer, depending on what tour I had qualified for, and it's the same for as a tennis player, you pay your entrance fee, you go and play. As a footballer, as a rugby player, as a basketball player, ice hockey, whatever team sport it is, you have to get chosen. And the stress and anxiety when you take your sport seriously involved in that sort of competition within a squad of players that is also about cooperation. That's it's in part some of the time I think why sports psychologists exist at clubs and teams, to be able to help coaches and players navigate that. And I'll do the right thing. I won't name names here, but I've been, again, blessed to work with a lot of, say, Premier League clubs here in England. And my first conversation I had with a very, very prominent head coach or manager, if you want to call him that, in English Premier League, is the first thing he said to me. He said to me, Dan, my biggest challenge is the psychological challenge of having to leave players out. Dealing with that, them dealing with it, and so on and so forth. So I'm just one big advertisement there for your research. So not probably putting a question back at you, but just some comments about the challenges at the coalface with this stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I think there's a few different things that I've picked up out of what you've just said. The first one comes out of my applied consultancy, where I work a lot with players who are what I would call bubble players. They sometimes play, they sometimes don't. They sometimes play, they sometimes don't. And for them, psychologically, this is extremely stressful. It is one of those things where they fall into a fear of failure mindset. They are not taking the necessary risks that they need to actually be at their top of their performance. There's a lot of performance doubts that come with that. It's a very difficult spot. And it sounds funny because, like, I find players that actually don't get any playing time, they might get discouraged, yes, but they actually don't expect, like suddenly to get a lot of playing time.
Yeah.
And the players that are playing most consistently, they don't expect to be dropped, right? So the bubble player that's in between, that gets a little bit of the carrot, but not all of it, really kind of wonders, okay, what do I need to evaluate now? What are my coaches, focusing on now? Why I'm playing or why I'm not playing? And this is a lot of times paired with coaches avoiding some of these difficult kind of conversations around positional competition, right? And particularly when it comes to selection time, they're just posting, boom, something on the wall, and there it is, and now all of the athletes essentially have to kind of deal with their own emotions on their own, right? And it's really interesting how different sports deal with that. Obviously, we are commenting a lot from a soccer perspective. Let's go to American football. American football has a depth chart where it's actually structured. There's a hierarchical chart where everyone is essentially, everyone's name is grouped in the positions. and you know at any point in time who's number 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it's visible. It hangs in the team room everywhere, right? It's you can today go online and check any kind of large NFL team or a football team at the college level, and they will have a depth chart, sometimes even published. Unthinkable in soccer. Unthinkable, right? Some of the coaches might have that in their team room, but that it's openly out there, that usually doesn't happen that much, right? It kind of speaks to, in soccer, I think we're trying, or the coaches are actually trying to make this hierarchy that is there a little bit more mutable. They want to suggest that people can actually rise in the hierarchy and drop in the hierarchy much frequently, just to kind of instill that motivation. Actually, we've done a couple of research projects on hierarchy mutability, on how coaches do that and why coaches do that, which is really interesting. Why coaches sometimes even promote more that this hierarchy is mutable, and that somebody can get up and down in the hierarchy more than actually really is, and why athletes are believing in that.
Just if you don't mind me interjecting a second, it's really interesting because what you're saying, I just it makes me think of having that hierarchy. Absolutely, I don't think ever would happen in soccer, football. I think that on the one hand, you'd look at that as a sports psychologist. I look at that and go, I quite like that because that gives players some certainty, and uncertainty is one of the biggest mediators of stress responses. But I ringing in my ears are the coaches, the many coaches I've worked with over the years who would say, and using an English phrase, well, Dan, they're just going to down tools. They're just going to down tools. They're not going to bother. And I'm talking about the players who are at the bottom of that hierarchy. They're not even going to bother because they'll see that as a helpless situation. And that brings in a whole new dynamic around coaching competence and player belief and the interaction between the two, and the complication of bringing in the hierarchy and how one would have to broaden and build a coaching practice with relation to that. But I quite like that idea of the hierarchy. Sorry, I interjected.
No worries. And so one of the things that I want to reflect on what you just said is, we in sport, and many coaches have this saying, you have to do whatever's in the best interest of the team.
Yeah.
And, there's been you're aware of the conversation that happened, I think, was it between Shaq and Kobe, or whoever that was, with there's no ME in team, or there's no I in team, but there's an ME. And so I have this conversation with many of my athletes and with my students, which side they stand on this particular statement. Because when we're thinking about positional competition, if you want to play, that is something that inherently is in your self-interest. And so there's the individualism. There's kind of like this, I want to get a part of the carrot. I want to be on the pitch on the weekend. Versus I'm not on the pitch, and now I'm just reverting to whatever is best in the team, kind of like this collectivistic idea. And I think we have to be really careful to manage that appropriately. I don't think we can ever beat the self-interest out of our players. Neither should we, because if we do, then they're stopping to push other teammates around them. They're just going to sit back and say like, oh, they're really not going to bother. They're just going to sit there, and I'm happy to wear the tracksuit, right? One of our coaches actually said the opposite. He said like, I'd rather have more athletes on my team that want to wear the jersey rather than the tracksuit, which I really liked.
Yes. Yes, I like that.
But so that individualistic and that self-interest, you can't take that out of athletes. They have to have it in order for a team to function. But at the same point in time, they can take it out in a malicious, envious, sabotaging kind of way, right? So there has to be established norms, how we are conducting positional competition and how we are selecting people in a way that we know nobody's going to be, or there's going to be a good portion of our team that's not going to be happy with it, but we have to find ways how we as a team can come together, right? And I watched a video clip the other day of Thomas Frank, who's the Brentford coach.
Yep, great coach.
And like he after win, gave a speech. I saw it on social media, and he actually acknowledged somebody who did not play,
Yes, I saw the clip.
you know,
Yes.
and said, and so player X, I just want to acknowledge how much you've helped us today because you've had these conversations. I know you want to play, but how you behave is how professionals really deal with this, right? So to me, that balance of individualism and collectivism in positional competition is something that is really fascinating.
And the player was Ben Mee, a player called Ben Mee. I saw the clip. It's a brilliant clip. I've got so much time for Thomas Frank. I think he's just a wonderful, wonderful coach, and open to the kind of things that we're talking about. You know, is coached himself and has a leadership coach. So it doesn't surprise me, and you know, and it makes me think. And I did, you know, I suppose a few minutes ago I alluded to the idea of kind of liking the hierarchy because it provides certainty. And I hear you, and I don't disagree with you. Let me pause that button on certainty, because you do have to, I think, find a way. It almost feels like one of the solutions to what you're suggesting, the challenge that you're posing here, one of those solutions of many solutions that can help. You're not going to help 100%, but can help that situation, is to create a little bit more certainty every single day. You know, if we come back to Thomas Frank, I would imagine with that player, a player called Ben Mee, a very, very good player who obviously wasn't playing, was disappointed it wasn't playing, but he was being a great teammate, irrespective of not playing. It wouldn't shock me if Thomas Frank was doing the right things by him, as in, for me, if you were to ask me what's required in those situations, it's honesty, it's solutions for those players, because I've been in environments where coaches have gone, well, I'm just honest with my players, but then they haven't necessarily found any solutions for them to get into the team. Honesty, solutions, great coaching, and a constant caring connection. For me, those are the four things. I'd love them to be four C's. I don't think I can do that. But honesty, find solutions, engage in great coaching, all the stuff we talk about on the show, deliberate practice and coaching sessions where there's individual tasks for those players and opportunities to experience desirable difficulties and challenge point and things like that for these players, combined with caring and connection. Those would be the kind of things that I'm immediately thinking of, absolutely vital to turn up the volume of certainty for these players in a very uncertain environment.
I agree with you. And I think one of the things that we have to kind of remember is we play sport for emotions. And I think if we didn't have uncertainty in sport, these emotions wouldn't be there. And so to me, I think the positional competition, I think the magical solution is to always keep a little bit of uncertainty, to always tap someone on the shoulder to kind of say, like, listen, you need to perform. Like, you need to
Yep.
perform. That's our business. It's a necessary process that we're engaging in.
Yes.
And that's okay. That's everyone keeps that sharp, right? But I think also being very open about what a player can expect. And when I'm reflecting on the work that I do with the coaches and with athletes here, I talk quite a bit about, with the coaches about the communication around selection and how they can communicate and converse with like some athletes who might be disappointed. And to me, I think it goes back to this expectation piece of, if a player hasn't played in 6 games and suddenly you want them to play, give them a heads up, because that might change their expectations for what they might experiencing. If a player has played for 7 games in a row and suddenly you want to sit them, then give them a heads up and talk with them, because this might very much contradict the expectations that this particular player has. And so having these conversations, we have to acknowledge that coaches are busy people and they don't have the time to maybe speak with everyone. But if there are sudden changes in expectations, I think those are the players that need the communication.
No.
If there's a player that hasn't played for 5, 6 games, a younger player that needs to develop, you've given them a good kind of like plan on how this person is going to develop in the future, but you're not planning with that person to take significant minutes, you don't need to necessarily have a conversation with them every single game of like, and by the way, nothing has changed. That's okay. But I think the moment the expectations are changing, I think that's when we need to communicate. That's number one. I think number two, the communication and how you deal with your athletes really have to align with the coaching philosophy. And so, caring as an example, empathy as an example, if those are in your coaching style, they need to be reflected in terms of how you select. You can't say you care about your athletes and then you bench someone who's usually been playing all of a sudden because they might have not had a good practice. You need to have a conversation with them. And I have many examples of where this communication has really been really broken down and really has affected the athlete, but also the coach, obviously, because it impacts the coach athlete relationship, and in a way that can be very detrimental. And what it sometimes takes one or two instances to actually break that trust between the coach and the athlete. And so I think coaches can be more aware of how to show the empathy. And that's the Thomas Frank example, that he showed empathy in that moment. I know how you feel. I'm feeling with you. I wish I could put you on the pitch as well, but I can't. That's my job. That's the unfortunate reality of it. We are living in an environment where that's just normal. That has to be accepted. But the negative emotions that come with it, I really appreciate how we can not resolve them, but manage them so we as a team can move forward. Right? We as a collective can move forward into the right direction. So, to me, I think having some of those hard conversations, obviously, nobody likes that. All of the coaches that I talk to, they really care about the players. They really would love to play every single one of them because they're very good people. They are very good athletes at this level, but they can't because that's just how reality works.
Just speaking there, the ability to have hard conversations. It's when you were talking about empathic communication. It was Stephen Rolnick. His words were ringing in my ear. The founder of motivational interviewing, who's been on the show, and how empathy plays such an important role in motivational interviewing. It's such a simple framework that coaches can utilize in order to, help them have great conversations, to be better listeners, to ask open questions, and that can be part of a process here of managing expectations. And I think another word, and I'm keen to get back to the paper, so please excuse me, but you've got me quite enthusiastic about this topic. Another word that's coming through that perhaps we haven't used, but kind of, sizzles under the surface here as we're speaking is control. Another legend of psychology I'm thinking of here is Martin Seligman and the idea of learned helplessness, right? That if a player, if you're not doing any of these things, whether it's the stuff I've mentioned, the stuff you've mentioned, then players don't feel that they've got any control at all. And so subsequently, they learn to experience helplessness. They feel helpless in this environment. And that's not a great place to be, isn't it? That's when you've got a coaching culture that can get yourself into all kinds of problems. And often coaches, managers get sacked on that basis, don't they, Sebastian?
Yeah, and so fascinating. In our environment, I think it is the disconnect between the coach and the athlete, but also sometimes the lack of communication from the coach. And then, especially those bubble players that I alluded to earlier, they, in their mind, go on their little journey to kind of think about, what do I need to change? What do I need to change so I can actually get playing time for the next competition? And suddenly they are not sticking to the things that they are really good at, for the things that they're actually brought into the team for. So, I always use this analogy of, with my athletes, what are your meat and potatoes? You don't need to make spaghetti. You need to make sure that you make the best meat and potatoes possible, right? Stick to the things that you are good at. Make sure that you have a clear role identity of where you fit in. Believe in that and work on those elements. Make sure that you can look yourself in the mirror and reflect on the things that you're usually doing well. And if you do them consistently well, you're probably going to have a better chance of actually potentially playing in the end, than to kind of think about, I need to get better at this, I need to get better at this, I need to get better at this and this and this. And that doesn't even fit to your playing identity, right? This doesn't mean that athletes should dismiss things that they can improve upon. For sure, everyone can improve upon that. Everyone can build their game. Everyone can get better at other skills. But be aware of the things that you're doing well, and be aware for what kind of reason you've actually been brought into the team. What's your job description? What are the things that you need to do well that really kind of like help you? And that's what we're working on. When I work with an athlete here, what we're working on to kind of like get them out of that helplessness a little bit, out of this, hey, ultimately the decisions of the coach are out of my hands. So what do we have in control? In control, this is what we can do well and what we can evaluate ourselves. When you have a practice that you're not happy with, did you do A, B, C, D that are your strengths? Did you do those not well? If the answer is yes, well, let's work on those, right? And if you say A, B, C, D are in place and I'm doing really, really well for me personally, and you still don't get to play, okay, we can live with that a little bit better and we can maybe understand a little bit further of what we can do. But ultimately, those are the criteria that will get you out of that.
This conversation we're having, how does this bear relationship with the paper that we're here to talk about today? Because I'm sure we're already referring to what's in the paper, but just a reminder that paper is entitled "Advancement of a Conceptual Framework for Positional Competition in Sport." Can we start to break this down a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So when we're looking at the paper, we really dove into trying to understand what positional competition is and what it entails. And we found that athletes continuously are trying to collect information of where they stand within the team. And this information can come from essentially psychological and behavioral processes. And so some of the psychological processes is your self-awareness, that you know how to evaluate your own performance in relation to others. There's a social comparison element in there, that you are looking over your shoulder and say like, oh, this person is in my competition, in my position, and they are doing this and this and this. Am I doing this? Can I actually keep up with them? And then there's feedback from the coaches, right? There's feedback that you get in terms of evaluations, in terms of situational kind of feedback, encouragement, etc. And also feedback that you get from your teammates that can have that have an appreciation of where you should be within that, within the positional competition. And then we have some behavioral elements. And so those behavioral elements we build a model, obviously, and they're called performance related processes. And so the performance related processes are the intention that you're trying to push your teammates. So behaviorally, you're trying to really, really push against them, provide them with intensity, and provide them to achieve a higher level of performance by your behaviors. This is a reciprocal relationship. So that also means that, like, your teammates will also try to push you, which is another one of those perceptions, that you feel like your teammates are actually pushing you to be better. And that you find that you contextually learn, that you grow as a player, that you get better on this journey of positional competition, and through that improve your abilities. So those were some of the things that we've gathered. Now, one of the things that I want to underline here is most of those sound very positive. And a lot of people, when you're looking at the media, when they refer to positional competition, a lot of times they refer to it as healthy competition. I personally don't like this term very much, because competition to me is just a social process, and the interpretation how we do it makes it positive or negative. I don't think that there is actually such a thing as healthy competition. It's just like how we carry it out. But a lot of times when we're talking about healthy competition, we're talking about competition within a team. So, is positional competition something that is positive, or is positional competition something that is negative? And I think the answer is there's a little bit of both in there. So positional competition, and especially the self-comparison element, we've done a study where we looked at moral behaviors towards teammates. And we found that particularly the social comparative elements correlated a little bit more with antisocial behaviors towards our teammates, whereas pushing teammates and having this perception that I'm getting better correlated more with pro-social behaviors towards teammates. And there's some wonderful research by some Canadian researchers out there that actually looks at onboarding processes when new players are coming to the team and new competitors are thrown into the positional competition. That if there's not a trust and a relationship, there's maybe a lack of cohesion there. That then conflicts and erupt, and that there's some sabotaging behavior by some of the players that are that are already established, and they're withholding maybe some information. They're not providing as much mentorship. So it's quite rich, and I think positional competition really, if you structure it well, can be very adaptive, can help you very much. To enhance team functioning, but you also have to be aware that elements of positional competition might also have some maladaptive consequences.
So in this paper, you're breaking down positional competition to these kind of behaviors, these intrapersonal qualities, things like self-awareness, social comparison, the capacity to kind of detect where you are within the team and what's going on, and, how you can make your way into the team, and so on and so forth. So where does this lead in the paper? So is that really what the paper is about? It's kind of getting this rich description, these rich descriptions of positional competition, and if so, is the point of definition being able to develop our understanding and our ability to manage through positional competition?
Yeah, so the intention of this paper was, number one, to give us a theoretical understanding of where we're at with research on positional competition. This comes out of my dissertation, and I think with any dissertation, if you ask someone later on in their career, would you change anything about this? The answer is most likely yes. But it's a good starting point. Let me put it this way: of how we can look at positional competition from a research, but also from a practical lens. We have published in this paper alongside a questionnaire that people can apply to measure positional competition within their team. And this questionnaire measures the perceptions of athletes both towards themselves, towards the teammates, as well as towards the coaches. Transparency, selection fairness of the coaches, for example. So, obviously the intention was to provide a quantitative measure that we can then relate to other concepts as well, as a good researcher would do. But I think from a practical perspective, I also think it's a paper that I really wanted to use to put positional competition on the map of group dynamics. And I think in a lot of ways, competition within a team has been ignored by group dynamics for a large part. And I know many of my colleagues in group dynamics. They are fantastic people, and when I came out with this paper, they said, like, this is a really, really cool addition, because it is something that actually happens quite a bit, which obviously is great. And the conversations and discussions that I had with them around this topic had been fantastic. But I think also in group dynamics, we gravitate a little bit towards the very positive kind of like concepts. So how we measure leadership, how we measure cohesion, how we measure other things. Usually when you look at the evidence, a lot of the responses will be 6 out of 7, 6.5 out of 7, 5.9 out of 7. It seems that all of those teams already have like something that's fairly high, right? Like, it's, oh yeah, we're a great team and we have great leadership and we have great cohesion. If that's true or not, social desirability obviously is a different topic.
Yes.
But I think with positional competition, we have one of those elements where we can really kind of reflect to kind of say, like, this is probably like a middle of the park kind of thing, where at times we will probably have, some good elements around positional competition, but especially when we're talking about the social comparison element, the maybe also sometimes uncomfortable elements around positional competition, which are inevitable. You see a little bit of a different kind of like light on group dynamics, which I think is something that's really important to also kind of put a finger on.
I'd love to. This is all fascinating stuff, and I think I've got a couple of questions remaining here. One of which I'm going to give you a heads up on, so you can multitask and have a think about this as you answer my next question. But I would love to know, for those coaches listening in, any advice that you have for them in terms of managing positional competition and how they can go about it in their coaching practice, in their coaching culture. But before we get on to that, I'd love to know where this is going. I mean, I think you've sort of mentioned a few things there that are going to be relevant on your journey in this research area. But what's next?
So we have kind of developed a few different lines of research out of my positional competition work. And one of the really key things that we've considered has been selection experiences. And I know you've had several guests on the show that have talked about selection and selection experiences from an academy standpoint, for example. And we would really like to understand if the design of selection experiences has consequences. What kind of consequences result out of that for athletes, motivationally, behaviorally, effectively. And we're working right now on a project with Canada Soccer, actually, where I was lucky enough to secure some funding, where we first and foremost kind of like studied a broad kind of like idea of why and how these selection experiences are designed. And this might lead us then to kind of think about how can we design selection experiences a little bit better. This is both for team selection, but then obviously also for team selection on a weekly kind of basis, right? How do I best design those selection experiences, because they happen every single week in those high performance teams. And to me, Dan, I don't know if there's a coaching book out there that has a chapter that is called "How to Best Cut a Player," or how to best deselect a player. I haven't found it yet, and I think there's a large area that is missing that is so important for coaches. Being a coach is such a difficult job. You have to have so many different skills out of so many different areas. But I think that empathy and that making selections and knowing how to listen to people, knowing how to have a conversation with people, knowing how to read people are some of those skills that really kind of flow into this, how you can best select and how you can best design those particular experiences. So we're really fascinated about that.
And I think you've kind of preempted, or maybe you've answered a part of the last question. 2 to 3 ideas for coaches to be able to manage positional competition. What should coaches be considering here? We've spoken about a lot, but if you were to chop it back to 2 to 3 ideas, very unfair, I know, but what would they be?
Number one, know your athletes and know their expectations.
Great.
To me, I think, knowing what kind of people they are, knowing the aspirations that they have, knowing the pressures that they're coming in with, I think is a really, really important one. And I think that I haven't worked with too many professional athletes, but I would assume that that is actually even more important in a professional context than in a university context, even though it's already important in a university context. So that's number one. Number two, know how you as a coach can authentically do this particular process. Know your coaching philosophy, your mission and your vision, and make sure that your selection procedures actually align with that. And to me, I think if you want to foster development, if you really want to talk about growth and you want to be there for your athletes, you want to create a climate where people can thrive, how you design your weekly selections are going to be, one of the cornerstones that people will remember, that your athletes will remember about you. And so therefore you need to reflect about them. Number three, we've talked about this a little bit. Coaches are busy people and having these conversations is difficult. Sometimes you can maybe even engage other people like assistant coaches in those conversations. I think that would be a really important one, both to actually communicate the decision, or maybe if you'd like to communicate the decision, to contextualize the decision, I think is a really important one. But like making sure that you do that with empathy and you remember what it was like when you actually were an athlete and when you had to grapple with those emotions, right? I will give you one little anecdote. A friend of mine, his son actually played for the national team here for a sport that I don't need to mention. And he was in a training camp And as he came off the playing surface, there was a packed bag for him with a ticket, with a return ticket that he saw as he stepped off the playing surface. So he knew he was deselected and being cut, and that was it. And
Oh,
so and that he was a 15 to 16-year-old,
that's
I think,
awful.
what kind of message does that send to a 15 or 16-year-old? What kind of message does that tell you about the organization
Mm,
and the coach,
mm,
of that organization? So sometimes I think we in high performance, we are mistaking negativity with intensity.
mm.
To me, I think you can be intense, you can be demanding, but you still need to have empathy, you still have to have dignity, and you still need to consider that the other person that's there is still a human being.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm all for personal responsibility. But if you're in an environment like that, mistake or deliberately done, I mean, I just think that that's just an awful experience, isn't it? An awful experience. So a closing anecdote that highlights the importance of getting these things right. Sebastian, wow, what a really interesting conversation. Absolutely fantastic. I can't thank you enough for that. And I really know that you will have tapped the interest of everybody listening in. So, how can people find you, follow you, and potentially get in touch if you'd like them to?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. I really enjoyed this conversation. So I'm on LinkedIn. This is now the only social media platform that I engage in. For the sake of my own sanity, I've
That's
engaged
fair.
from some social media. So I am on Twitter or X still, but I usually don't consult that a whole lot anymore. So LinkedIn is probably the place where a lot of people can find me. Then I'm also, on the faculty website. So if you type in my name, Sebastian Harenberg, you will find me. My website, from San Francisco Xavier University. There's also my email address. So if you want to reach out, you can always send me an email as well.
Perfect. Sebastian, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that episode and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via X or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.